as Americans, it's incumbent upon us to think about the future of our civilization. And one of the best ways for us to think about the future of our civilization is by surveying the condition of the cultures and countries that are near us. And in our own hemisphere, there are several cautionary tales that many Americans should find instructive as to how we should conduct ourselves politically and morally. Cuba is one of them. A lot of South America is one of them. But in today's case, Venezuela is perhaps one of the most powerful cautionary tales to the American people. In the 1970s, Venezuela was a wealthy country, overflowing with bounds of examples of human potential. It was the crown jewel of the world, even the envy of many places in the world. But a few decades of socialistic authoritarian rule absolutely squandered that, squashed the megatons of human potential that existed in that country, and ushered in some of the most brutal and sinister dictatorship that has been seen in the American hemisphere in a very long time, under the rule of Hugo Chavez, and now under the rule of Nicolas Maduro, the current dictator of Venezuela. And so in my quest to build a revolution of the mind, in my quest to give all of you reference points to look at to understand what's going on in our culture, I decided to bring on someone who I met at a conference, a student who fled from Venezuela, who was only, I think, a year or so younger or older than me, not very much older than me, who was born in Caracas and who's going to tell you his story and who has some very instructive things for us as Americans to learn as we go into the 21st century and as we deal with our own socialistic examples here right at home, whether it be in the form of the Democratic Party, whether it be in the form of, most importantly, grassroots socialist groups like the DSA and the Revolutionary Socialists of America that are actively making moves to organize and seize institutions and do other kinds of direct action that threaten our republic. We have to open our eyes to this, my friends. And we have to be willing, not just to scream and shout and call people communists, but to actually understand what we're up against. Not in some abstract pie in the sky way, but in a real concrete way. So the next hour that you're going to hear is going to be a lot of that. It is a great conversation. My guest, Erik Suarez, was absolutely amazing. His information will be in the description down below if all of you wish to support his endeavors. But this is perhaps one of my most important interviews so far. And so I would really appreciate your feedback. I would appreciate you sharing, liking, commenting. And most importantly, I would appreciate you guys enjoying the next hour in 3 minutes, because this interview, I believe, is just a part of the process of us saving our great nation. Thank you guys so much, and please enjoy the interview. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Today, I am going to be talking about a topic that I alluded to in my intro that is actually quite important, and that is the future of Venezuela. Many of you who have been observing the news know very well that there has been great turmoil in that country for many, many, many years, but especially recently due to the election that happened. And there's a lot of controversy over the election from my opinion, clear and utter fraud that happened on behalf of the Maduro regime, to the fact that opposition leaders have been arrested and persecuted, the fact that Venezuelans are being denied their right of self-determination and self-governance, the fact that there are American influencers like Jackson Hinkle going into Venezuela to go ahead and run cover for dictators, the fact that there's an entire block of countries that are also doing the same thing. A lot of things, unfortunately, are not going well. But in order to understand this and understand this well, it's important to bring in people who have either direct experience with the issue or they have great knowledge of the issue, or both. And in the case of today's guest, I believe he has both. So today I am interviewing Erik, and I hope I'm saying your last name right, Suarez, is that correct? Erik
That's perfect.
Suarez, perfect. My Spanish came in handy then. My Spanish teaching came in handy. He is a Venezuelan. Actually, I'm gonna let him describe himself. I'm gonna let you describe yourself, Erik, and then we'll get into the interview. So please introduce yourself to my audience.
Yes, as you said, I'm Erik Suarez. I was born in Venezuela, in Caracas, and I've been here for already 6 years. I guess that I categorize myself as a conservative. a Catholic, but most importantly, somebody who is very worried about the situation in Venezuela. I have experience with international relations, working in human rights NGOs, and economics throughout my life. So it's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about what's going on. I think it's very important. It's very difficult at the same time, but I think that it's very important for people to know really what's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, just for some background for everyone to know, so I actually met you at a conference that I was at recently, and we had
Yes.
some very good conversations. And so, I like what, you guys know that I like to bring in people that I believe can give you guys value and can edify you. On this channel, I always talk about the revolution of the mind. And that doesn't just mean that we learn things that are obscure. That means that sometimes we go back to concepts that are fundamentally important to the functioning of civil society. And we find new ways to understand those concepts and apply them to our current situation across all domains, economic, foreign, domestic, so on and so forth. So, in the spirit of that, Eric, before I get into the content of today, let me just ask you some questions about you. So, you were born in Caracas. When did you leave Venezuela? How did you come to America? What's the story around that? And I'll ask you another question. At what point did you realize that the situation in Venezuela was bad and you wanted to be a voice speaking out about it to help other, American audiences understand what was going on?
Well, I'll answer the second one first, and the answer to that is that you always, when you're born in Venezuela and you all grow up in Venezuela, like I did, you realize very early on that the situation is not right. So I was born in 1999, which means that by the time I was born, Hugo Chavez was already in power. So basically, all my life I've been under the same Chavista regime. Chavista is how we call the the people who follow Hugo Chavez, or the socialism of the 21st century, like he described himself politically. And like growing up, watching my country slowly decay into like what we see today was a wake up experience as I was growing up. So, for example, I have many stories in which, I used to see, my quality of life go down in less than 2 years, and things of that nature that are a direct result of socialism policies. On other things too, like for example, seeing my family grow more worried because as I am growing up and I'm starting to go out, like casually with friends and things like that, the country is falling into a path of violence, political but also social violence, due to a high levels of criminality. And all of those decisions, growing up, they stay with you. I remember thousands of stories, both that happened to me and my family, but also friends. There's always a story to tell, a negative story to tell. So when you grow up like that and you see and then you learn of how socialist policies are the ones who create these conditions, I think it was as soon as I came to the U.S. that I started seeing how socialism is well regarded in universities. That I started saying, well, actually, it's not like that. This is the reality of socialism, and that made me stand up and have a voice and sometimes criticize both student body but also professors who think that socialism is great. And that's why I'm here. I mean, that's how I got to the US 6 years ago. I left Venezuela when I was 12. It was mostly my family's decision to leave. We first left to Peru. I finished high school there, and then I came here as an international student.
Wow. Wow. And so around the time you left, I know you were pretty young when that happened, but if you can remember, were things bad? Because we've seen stories of people not being able to pay for gas. We see stories of grocery stores being basically empty. We see stories of riots. Did you experience any of that, or were you aware of any of that happening?
I was very aware. So in Venezuela, what we have, and most is something that I guess is very modern from dictatorship nowadays. But back then, we still had, people would watch TV and cable news and everything. And sometimes when the dictator Hugo Chavez wanted, he will basically create or force everybody through the TV network to watch his speeches. So imagine you're watching at that time I was a lot into, Cartoon Network and things like that. And I don't know where just like your screen goes black, and then you see this like message from the government saying that they call him president, but that Hugo Chavez was going to speak. And then, that could last for hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. There was a time he was 5 hours straight. So, sometimes you have nothing else to do, or your family's watching and you listen to some of the things that are happening. And I remember this specific case, which I think it's engraved in my memory, in the memory of many Venezuelans around that time. That was Hugo Chavez, for example, walking around this very uh, populated um, commercial area, commercial zone full of stores. And he will just walk down the aisle, like the street, and just ask, okay, what is that store over there? And they will answer him, oh, it's a jewelry store from these people. And he will just call and say, well, that's now expropriated. That's the property of the state. He will just, by pointing fingers, just like take away everybody, the life work and the property of people who have been there for ages. So, that's something that you see, that you can remember. Then I left just before the economic collapse, but everything was leading to that. I remember when when the government started with price controls, that was a huge thing. Then also when they would like continue to print money just because they wanted to um, put more money and give more money to the people, thinking that, oh, if we print more money, nothing's going to happen. And then high inflation started happening. So I remember that we left just before everything started to go down. And there was a specific case that's the reason we left. It was because my grandfather, actually, he was a very politically active. He liked politics. He was very active. He was subscribed to a political party in Venezuela who was in opposition to the Chavista regime. And what happened was that my mom, because she was very, also participant, we would go, with my family, she would go to protests when there were protests and things of that nature. And around that time, in around 2012, we started receiving calls to our home from unknown numbers trying to threaten my family, my mom. Like they knew where
Wow.
I went to school. They knew where I was, where my dad worked, things like that, just to threaten and try to like stop us from going out, and my mom specifically to go out and protest. Um, and that's because like there was a connection through my grandfather and things like that. And in one opportunity, we were in a mall and we were walking around, and my family, I was around 11 or 12. I remember what I now know that it was a kidnapping attempt to my family during those times. So we try to go to the police, and then we had serious belief that the police could be working with the people who were trying to kidnap us, because back in Venezuela, the corruption is so engraved into all the institutions that you never know, you don't know who to trust. So stories like that, like that too about my family. I have uncles who were kidnapped and who were, robbed because the insecurity is high. Like there's every Venezuelan that that lived throughout, I will say 2007 and 2015 or 16 in Venezuela has a story like that.
Wow. So when you say kidnapping, do you mean like people were actively, when you say kidnapping, was it a result of your mother's political activism? Was it the fact that there were just malicious people that wanted to do bad things to people just for the heck of it? And who would be
Well,
doing the kidnapping? Would it be narco terrorists? Would it be the police? Would it be the government? Would it be a consortium?
that's one of the most difficult parts, is because you don't really never know. So what happened is that was around the time that we were getting phone calls, and that we know that it was because of my grandfather's and then my mom's political, activism and things that they were doing in Venezuela. But after very close to that time, that was when the kidnapping attempt happened. We know that that was the case because we noticed my family, well, my mom and my dad noticed people following us throughout the mall. It was me, my little sister, my mom, and my dad. And we had to separate to try to like divide the people and go to very populated areas and then call my grandfather to pick us up and, leave everything. Like it was very, very traumatized, a very traumatic experience, to be honest. And that's the thing. Venezuela is also a very insecure country where kidnappings happen all the time from not cartels, but I will say gang members or just people who use that to just ask for money later or even worse things. That's one of the most difficult parts of this dictatorship is that you never know who's behind you. It could be an individual gang or it could be a government operation or you never know. You really never know.
Wow. So, actually, on this point, when I was looking at the election results come in, there was different feeds showing the ground on Venezuela, and there were quite a few feeds showing biker gangs that had been mobilized by Maduro, either directly or indirectly. And I've noticed in general, one of the ways authoritarians maintain political power, they do it both formally and informally. Formally, they do so by exercising the levers of power, whether it be the election commission in Venezuela, whether it be the military, so on and so forth. But informally, I think this is more powerful too. They do so by mobilizing social forces to keep the dissident elements of society in check. This is more powerful because it's very easy to fight your government. It's not very easy to fight your neighbor or someone down the street. In fact, when that starts to happen, the society dissolves even further because now you're not just fighting an outward enemy, which is the government. You're also fighting a inward enemy, which is your own neighbor, your own people. And this is why authoritarianism is a social cancer. So how have you seen, is this by design? Is this kind of by design? This because I think one of the big reasons people were intimidated, and we'll get into the election in a second, but I kind of just want to set this up, is because there were so many rogue forces on the ground in Venezuela on election day, intimidating people. What is your knowledge about this? What do you know about this?
Yeah, it is a very common practice in Venezuela. This is not the first time. Like you said, you just saw images of people. It was like gang members trying to like repress and make people shoot people, kill people to just stop the protest. But that's something that has been going on since 2014 in Venezuela. That's what we call colectivos. So colectivos are gangs who are paid or are affiliated indirectly with the government and they're like they're killing apparatus. So when there's protests in Venezuela since 2014, there was always repression from the from the police, especially the anti riot police, and a lot of images from that. That was very cruel, very difficult. But what they were trying to do and what they usually try to do is use them to repress the big protests. And then what a lot of people started doing was make small protests in their communities, trying to block streets within their communities and trying to like block access and try to do especially like be more aggressive at night and things like that. And what the government started doing was basically giving authority or giving these colectivos the power for them to just go in because they already know kind of the community and just because these are gang members just murder people on the street and that's very well known that that's a government apparatus is by design. They are not an official force of the government but they're like you said it's an unofficial. The government in Venezuela has full control of the official power, which let's say it's military, let's call it police, let's call it anti-riot police, and let's call it the intelligence apparatus. What you could say it's like the FBI of Venezuela, which is El SEBIN. And they also have a lot of control in the unofficial power, which will be the gangs, the people who own the guns. Because let's remember, Venezuela doesn't have a Second Amendment, and there was policies passed for the citizenry not to own weapons. And what ended up happening was only the people who were either the police or close to the police or these gang members are the ones who have the weapons and the guns. So in the end, like you said, it is very let's it has been by design. Everything in the repression apparatus of Venezuela is made like this by design, and there's no every single death that happens, even if it comes from a gang member who is not an official government institution, of course, it is responsibility of the regime because they are put there, and the gangs, the colectivos, are there for that purpose.
Wow. Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, and that dynamic is also very important for folks to understand because a lot of people unfortunately don't realize that in order for authoritarianism to be effective, it has to be multidimensional. This is true whether it was the Nazi regime, whether it was Mussolini's regime. And so I wanted to really hone in on that, and I find that to be a really concerning thing. So let's talk about the election. Now, this is an area that I've seen a lot of information about. I don't know what to believe. In fact, I made a tweet and and he actually responded to my tweet, and I'll just paraphrase for the audience. The tweet said that authoritarians will sometimes wear the skin suit of like democracy or some benevolent process, so to speak, in order to legitimize their stay in power. Now, you said that my assessment was correct, but there's more going on here. So why don't you just tell me in general, just give us a general overview of the election, give us a general overview of the arguments of the opposition and of Maduro, and tell me your general thoughts about what's going on in terms of the election in Venezuela.
Well, to understand the current situation in Venezuela, the current election, to give more context into it, you need to go back to, I would say, the transition of the Trump administration to the Biden administration, because the US foreign policy on Venezuela plays a key role in understanding what is really going on right now. So during Trump, the policy towards Venezuela, the foreign policy towards Venezuela was very aggressive. It was, let's block them, let's stop complete trade with them, let's force them to be isolated from the world, to not be able to negotiate with our allies, especially on their oil industry, with Venezuela, because they are, of course, an illegitimate government. Why they were an illegitimate government? Back in around that time, especially around 2019, the figure of Juan Guaido happens to come up to the stage. Juan Guaido was back then the president of the assembly, and around that time there was a previous election in Venezuela in which Maduro fakes the election, commits fraud, and emerges as the winner. But because there was a clear evidence of fraud, uh, the legal argument of the Venezuelan opposition was, okay, there's a vacuum of power because Maduro is legitimate. And in our constitution, when there's a vacuum of power, the one who takes over the role of president is the president of the National Assembly, which would be Congress, translated into US terms. And that was Juan Guaido. What happens then is that Juan Guaido takes control. The US recognizes the legitimate presidency of Juan Guaido as interim president, and a whole coalition of international community countries started recognizing Juan Guaido. That's around the time that Venezuela had open embassies in the United States, controlled by the opposition, also in Peru, also in Colombia, and in many other countries that recognize Juan Guaido. Fast forward to Biden, we're having this oil disruption in the markets. We're having a lot of issues when it comes to oil. The oil prices are going on in the US. You cannot trade with Russia because Russia is in active war with Ukraine. And then you have the situation going in the Middle East. So what ended up Biden doing was stop recognizing Juan Guaido as the legitimate president and recognize again the figure of Nicolas Maduro. And they start having negotiations. These negotiations are basically trades of, okay, we are going to allow back to open commerce of Venezuelan oil to the US because it's in the interest of Biden to recover this oil disruption and for the allies of the United States. And in exchange, what we want is we want American prisoners that were held in Venezuela, but also we want the promise that you will participate in free and fair elections. So for the last 4 years of Biden administration, what has been going on is a lot of negotiating process in which the U.S. has given back to Venezuela prisoners like Alex Saab, which is basically a drug trafficker, the one who kept all the accounts of Nicolas Maduro. Because you have to remember, Nicolas Maduro is not only a dictator, but he is the head of a drug trafficking network in South America and North America. And that person who led those accounts, who was keeping track of the accounts, was Alex Saab, who was captured in the US. And then he was given back to Venezuela in exchange of free and fair elections, the promise of free and fair elections, and American prisoners held in Venezuela. Then you also had in the US the nephews of Nicolas Maduro, who were caught in an airplane trafficking drugs. and they were captured and they were judged and they were in the United States. Those people were given back to, and in exchange of free and fair elections and other prisoners, American prisoners. And that negotiation has been going on. But the two main things from these negotiations have been the promise of fair and free elections and removing sanctions on the oil industry in Venezuela. Fast forward to the election of right now. Clearly, that did not happen. Why that did not happen? And we're going to have to go back a few months before. Because of these negotiations and the promise of free and fair elections, the opposition in Venezuela goes to a primary election to decide, okay, so apparently there's going to be elections, general elections in Venezuela. We are going to have to put a candidate. And after the primaries, the candidate was this politician called Maria Corina Machado. When she's about to register for the general election, they disqualify her on their claims of, I think it was terrorism or insurrection or something that made up by the government to disqualify her. Then she tried to put another person, and that person was also disqualified until we have the figure of Edmundo Gonzalez, who is the person who eventually manages to be enrolled into the election process and goes to elections against the regime. Now, this is more a rhetorical question, but I and people like me were very doubtful of that process because two reasons. Or the main reason would be you cannot go to free and fair elections with a dictatorial regime who has no incentives of living. And that's the main criticism of the first part. Why would a regime that has been known of committing fraud in elections, who has been known of committing human rights abuses, who has been known of when losing elections and fraudulently and people go protest has killed people after that process. So what makes you think as an opposition leader that things are going to be different? And that was the whole process of it. And the answer is it's not going to be different. What they're going to do is trying to use these elections to legitimize themselves again. And that's when I said that your interpretation was correct. You were just missing the context and understanding the background of Venezuela and how the regime has done this over and over and over again. And that the only result out of this is that the regime is just trying to gain legitimacy once again. And that's the process that we're seeing right now. Of course, everybody knows that the regime is dictatorial, that these elections were not even free or fair because it was already very hard to vote. In fact, 7 million Venezuelans who are abroad could not vote because they were abroad and not inside Venezuela. And on top of everything, they managed to get more votes, and still the government commits fraud. So that's the situation we're in right now.
Yeah, and so there's been several different people talking about the results of the election as well. And there was a report I read at The Hill this morning that the current opposition leader claims that he won upwards of 70% of the vote and that Maduro won about 30%. For people that are not really familiar with that process or how they could come around to those results, because of course Maduro has accused the CIA of hacking into the machines and delaying the process and tampering with things. So for people that may be of that bent, and if they're watching me, then God bless them, because I'm not sure how they found my content. But if they're of that bent, can you explain to them how the opposition knows what the true vote totals are, despite the trickery from the Maduro regime, and how that is not an example of foreign interference that some people believe it is?
So what the opposition did was actually very, very interesting. It was that during the the election, the way that the election works is that you vote in this machine, and the machine, takes the data from that specific machine, how many people voted, who voted for who, and the percentages, and then sends that information to the center, the National Center for Elections, which we call CNE in Venezuela, who then counts the votes and makes that whole, gets all of the votes and then publishes the results. What the opposition did this time was that they had people who were the people who were supposed to be in each election center, sorry, and before they would send the votes to the Center of National Elections, sorry, they will have this paper thing, let's say like receipt, and they will read it out loud. And that wasn't a strategy to show that in every single election there was the opposition managed to get copies of those things, and they started sending those copies to their own individual counting and mechanism. So while the fraud was being committed in the National Election Center by the Maduro regime, the opposition was also making their own count and counting everything and from making their own results with and the very interesting part of this is that they have the receipts, and you can see every single receipt of every single machine and every single center, and the government hasn't even published yet theirs. So that's the difference. That's how you know that the actual results are the ones that the opposition is making. But again, that's how that was made possible. That's how they actually managed to count and get real information of how it happened and what the results were. The major issue is that if you're in this dictatorship, it doesn't matter if you actually got the votes. If you don't have the power to protect and make the institutions take over the institutions as the democratic process would be. The power, the monopoly of power, like we say government is still on the hands of Nicolas Maduro. And that's the major issue that we have right now. How are we going to, even though we have the votes, and there's the result, how can we really take over the institutions if we have none of the power? Let's say the military, let's say the police, let's say, we don't have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Very enlightening. So I would be remiss if I didn't address the geopolitical angle of this. So there have been several nations that have been coming to Venezuela's aid. I believe I read that Hungary has stopped a censor of Maduro, which is very interesting to me because I believe Viktor Orban is the leader of Hungary. And so, I wouldn't expect him to be somebody that would cozy up a socialist. Maybe I don't know much about Orban, but he's been cozying up with the American right recently, which I find very interesting as well. I have many thoughts about that. And of course, there's been other nations that have also been saying that the election results were fine. There's of course been nations like Argentina and the prime minister or president of Chile, who was apparently a socialist, who's also been questioning the results, which I find quite interesting as well. So there are some people, and I must mention him again. I don't want to mention him, but unfortunately I have to because he's an American and he's been on the ground, like Jackson Hinkle. And for those people who do not know who he is, who are fortunate enough not to know who he is the leader of what is called a MAGA communism. So MAGA communism, it makes no sense, does it?
Yeah,
It makes no sense. But MAGA communism, I'll just give the TLDR for it. Essentially, it's attempting to appropriate the aesthetics of Donald Trump's populism with communism principles. So it's basically just repackaged communism for people that may like Donald Trump. That's essentially what it is. There's more to it, but there's no need to go into all that because it's nonsense anyway. It's just communism. And if you dislike communism, you dislike MAGA communism. But anyway, he went down to Venezuela and he did a question and answer session with Maduro. And he said, well, Maduro, people in North America support you, da, 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 da. And Maduro goes into this very long rant about how he's been to Miami and how he knows about America and how Elon Musk is evil and things of that sort. So there are some people that believe that Maduro is fighting against the CIA and the State Department, and that they are trying to provoke a regime change in Venezuela like they've done before. There are others that believe that Maduro is an illegitimate dictator, but, foreign powers shouldn't try to influence a domestic election. What is your take on all of this? Because, look, the CIA has done regime change in the past. And as someone who is a committed constitutionalist, I'm against that. I want America to focus on maintaining our borders, maintaining our country, and not trying to cause turmoil elsewhere. But it seems to me, even if you don't accept the idea of like foreign regime change, you should be able to condemn what's happening in Venezuela with clear eyes. What's your perspective about it?
Well, I think that there was a couple of things that I want to address on that, but the first one would be that yes, I do believe that the U.S. has to focus their efforts and their efforts in maintaining security of their own country first. And but at the same time, I believe that Venezuela is a higher security risk to the U.S. than it is often thought about. And not only
Interesting.
Venezuela, but let's add Cuba to that mix too, because at the end of the day, the Cuba regime is also has its hands intertwined with the Venezuelan regime and also the Nicaraguan regime. But let's focus on Cuba and Venezuela. Jackson Hinkle, just to mention him, he was part of the people who went to serve the election process and then claimed that it was completely fair. And we all know, well, Jackson Hinkle and his rhetoric and things like that. Um, but that shows you that there's a connection and that there's a connection between the Venezuelan regime and U.S. Personalities, if you want to call it like that, which is already dangerous. Um, but most importantly, it's not new that regimes, not only communists but socialists and things like that, they use useful idiots sometimes to try to esparce and try to sell the idea that their regimes are legitimate. I have zero doubt that Jackson Hinkle is being used as a useful idiot by the regime, both the Cuban regime, the Venezuelan regime, and every regime that he has come out in supporting the last few years. I think he has been very, very fond of every single dictatorship that I can think of around the world lately. But again, that doesn't surprise me. I think that there's always going to be people who are going to be either paid or just promised that they're going to have a better impact by that join this propaganda machine of the regime. So that's not surprising. But that shows you that the regime is trying to get into American politics directly or indirectly. You mentioned that Maduro talked about Miami and about how he knows Miami. Maduro does know Miami and does know New York because he was invited by the leadership of Black Lives Matter to speak in New York to
Wow.
conferences of young Americans. Yes,
Wow.
not many people know that. It was
Wow.
before the protests. And you have pictures of the leadership. I think it's Patrice Cullors and some of the other leadership with there's pictures of them hugging and talking with Nicolas Maduro because that's why they are. That's what they are. They are extreme left, communist, pro all of these regimes, institutions. That's what Black Lives Matter is. Then you have the DSA sending people to Venezuela. Also, the Young Democratic Socialists of America,
Oh,
for which
really?
actually AOC is part of. Yes,
Wow.
sending delegations sometimes to Venezuela to meet with Nicolas Maduro and other members of the regime. That is something that happened. And again, you can. I have zero doubt that there's a quid pro quo right there, and that there's connections, and that there's interest, and that there's in a degree Venezuelan, let's say, soft power entering the US and making changes in the US politics and influencing US youth and influencing US politics. So I agree 100% with you that the US should focus on its security, and focusing on Venezuela and focusing on putting barriers on Venezuela for those things not to happen is focusing on the US. And we can say the same about Cuba because Cuba is part of that intelligence network as well. So sometimes I guess, when it comes to our region, I'm not going to say that I don't want the U.S. to involve in foreign policy at all, or to not maintain certain order internationally and power internationally. But there's got to be a point where the U.S. needs to securely and have strong security and enforce their region, which is the Americas, let's say. And that's not happening when you have a neighbor 90 miles from your territory that is doing these things and using their soft power and influences to shape and influence American culture and American politics. Um, but yeah, I think that that's happening 100%. So I think this is also a call for Americans to be more aware of those things happening.
Wow. So first of all, you just gave me two bits of information that I did not know whatsoever. Black Lives Matter met with Maduro, and the DSA, the largest socialist group in America, especially the largest youth one in America,
there's many socialist groups, but they're the largest and probably best financed. Also, sent a delegation there. I didn't know that. And if that is absolutely true, and I believe that it is true because you told me, I believe you, then that most certainly means that there is a exercise of soft power happening within the borders of the United States. There's absolutely
100%.
no reason. There's no reason for a foreign government to be interacting with student groups in our country unless they seek to influence them to change the socio-political situation within the country. Unfortunately, this is something that does happen when foreign nations run intelligence operations. They will sometimes infiltrate the universities. China did this, with their Confucius
Confucius
Institute.
Institute.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. And with professors and students and foreign exchange students. But of course, our response to that, we've tackled that and handled that because you recognize that as a national security threat. It's amazing to me that what you said is not more mainstream, especially in conservative politics. I find that very
It
disturbing.
should. And
Yeah,
they're not
yeah,
hiding it either. You
yeah.
can go right now to the DSA webpage and just literally just look for Venezuela on their search, and you will see the pictures of the travel that they made to Venezuela. It's not even hidden. It's out there. You can just put Black Lives Matter, Nicolas Maduro, and you can find the pictures and you can see what was the specific conference that he went to speak in New York. It was before the riots, definitely when Black Lives Matter wasn't as big, but still that tells you the intent and the values and the influence that these regimes are having on American culture, and with
Yeah.
these leadership who then raised millions of dollars from the American people, and now they're funding their own programs here in the US. So those things are happening, and it's very dangerous, and it's a very big national security threat that it's not often talked about.
And that's outrageous. And I'll articulate it from my point of view is, I'm very much America first in the colloquial sense, very much a non-interventionalist foreign wise. But if the enemy is already on our doorstep and they're already in our cities and our schools and our country, at that point, being America first must necessitate taking on that enemy and fighting them where they are. So I absolutely hope that more people realize the threat that we're facing here. Because as I talk this through, I'm just thinking about the implications. We're seeing what's happening in the UK right now. We're seeing the fact that, decades of foreign policy that literally infantilized the British people and sold them the lie of multiculturalism and false benevolence, which has now resulted in gangs of Islamists running around their cities with 12-inch knives, cutting up people, smashing cars. This is finally coming to a head, and their civilization is paying a steep cost for it. Well, America, we're a little bit different, but not necessarily, because that same thing can happen here. But if it happens here,
Yes.
it'll happen in a very quiet way. It'll happen in a very passive way. And the same justifications will, of course, be used for it. You can easily see how an enemy can use foreign cooperation in the name of diversity and enrichment of the culture as a means of allowing themselves to get into the door. So I'm very interested in seeing how that could possibly play out negatively for America. There are some people that are theorizing that there will be a socialist revolution in America in the next, few decades if we don't actually correct the problem. That there are communists that are actively planning things against our country. And some of them, you look at some of these organizations, they do seem to be planning things. They seem to be planning a lot of things.
There is
And
100%, and I didn't even mention Antifa, which is basically
absolutely.
which is basically the let's say violent um, arm of these socialist groups, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there is a big of intersection between who is member of DSA, who is member of Black Lives Matter, the organization, and who joins or starts going to Antifa protests and covers their faces and starts like damaging buildings and destroying, um, the cities and things like that. I don't think that this is all organic. There is a big planification part, and there is a big influence, and the ones who are knocking our doors and they're not even hiding it is the Cuban regime and Venezuelan regime. Venezuela and Cuba are not going to send military. They won't send. I mean, they already send spies. Cuba is one of the largest spy let's say, exporters to the U.S. In history. Um, but they won't be like that. They will be as aggressive. They will use their soft power. Cuba is a training ground for every socialist leader who wants to aim to be a dictator in Latin America, and they're using those training centers to probably send things to the U.S. It is not hidden. It is something that people already know in Latin America, and I think that we have to start pushing more in the U.S. as well, because it is happening here and you can see it.
So, do you advocate an offensive approach against the intrusion of Cuban and Venezuelan soft power into American civil society, or do you advocate an offensive approach? How you answer this, I think will determine how a lot of people contextualize the proper American response to this threat. Because if you pose a offensive approach, you're going to have fears of continued U.S. interventions we have a very bad history in Latin America. I'm sure you would probably agree. We've done some things. We funded people, funded FARC in Colombia and things like that. And when they got a hand, they went crazy. We did some bad things in that region. So people might be scared of that. But if you advocate a defensive approach, maybe that'd be more malleable. I don't know. But what do you think about that?
There's gotta be like it is. I like to contextualize foreign policy as a fight. In a fight, you cannot just go all in because you can get a hook to the face if you're not protecting, and you cannot just defend because you're gonna just be waiting for the enemy to just come at you. You need to do both. I think that the solution for both Cuba and Venezuela has to come internally, 100%. There should not be any military intervention financed by the American taxpayer, and not only financed with money, but financed with their lives into Venezuela and the U.S. Because I won't ask the mother of of two in Mississippi to send their kids to fight for Venezuelan revolution, because that's not their fight. 100%. That's not their fight. The Venezuelan crisis needs to be solved from within, but the U.S. needs to facilitate that. I don't want to use the word facilitate. I want to retract from that. The U.S. needs to help with being strong when that solution comes, when the internal part happens, to be ready and willing to give the support they need internationally, the way that Trump, for example, did in 2016 with in the 2019 with Juan Guaido, which was, okay, there is a new figure there, we recognize it, and we are going to move our international forces to recognize that leader. And then the internal part needs to do their part, which they didn't back then. But I think the international response needs to be that. Be ready to help diplomatically, let's call it like that, the transition process of Venezuela. And also be ready that if the regime becomes insane and starts murdering Venezuelans in the street, put the necessary both sanctions, but also, a more structured peace intervention there. If the regime starts like literally just mauling people in the street like they did in China back then, in I'm imagining something like Tiananmen Square, right? Like if those things are happening to that degree. But definitely the U.S. should not be the one sending the troops and like, I guess that the comparison I'm trying to make is that we don't want to be another Afghanistan, a war that lasts 10 years. We want to be the solution has to come from the inside, 100%. And I don't see that happening right now, especially under this process, because the opposition is definitely has been very weak and very unable to translate those efforts, the inside efforts which exist, into a bigger movement.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think this is something that a lot of people should consider and think about deeply. So let's talk a little bit more about you now. You're here in the United States. Hopefully you're on the path, if you're not already living the American dream, and you're talking about these issues, you're being a voice. What is your message to Americans about the specter of socialism? Because in this country right now, of the two major candidates declared for president, Kamala Harris, many of her policies are outwardly socialistic, whether it be the wanting to ban meat consumption, whether it be the electric vehicle mandate, whether it be regardless of what she supported in the past, whether it be, of course, defunding the cops and funding social organizations or whatever. Much of her policies are quite socialistic. And so what should Americans know about socialism? How has it mutated over the years? Many people are used to the Cold War depictions of socialism, where it was the evil Russians. Well, I think things have changed. I don't think things are quite like that anymore. So what's the updated version that we should be worried about?
I will answer. If you allow me, I will answer that with a little, like a little story that I used to hear from my
Please,
family.
please.
And Venezuela. Let's go back to Venezuela, 1980s, 1990s. And you saw Venezuela that was in their prime. It was very successful. They had a great, the economy was doing very well. Everybody, it was a way different country that it was. Um, and like every great country that there is, there's always going to be issues. And the issue of the time was inequality. And you saw a lot the rise of these intellectuals, especially in universities and colleges, especially professors, claiming that it was an unfair society and it was unfair. Um, and that process started translating into a political movement, into a thought movement that eventually led up into the rise of figures like Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was this person who was supposedly to represent the people, supposedly to help the people. He was going to supposedly fix all of the inequalities and stand for the lower guy and things like that. And after that, we know the rest. What's very interesting though is that we back then there was a lot of Cubans in Venezuela, and Cubans who had lived through the Castro Revolution and who had lived communism in Cuba, and they would say, "Be careful with that guy. Be careful with Chavez, because he has those socialist ideas, and he will become somebody like Fidel Castro was for them." And what the Venezuelan answer was, there's no way that's going to happen in Venezuela. We're not an island. There's no way that the institutions can be corrupted. There's no way that they can establish a dictatorship like there was in Cuba. And now look at us, 20 years, well, more than 20 years, 30 years after that time. We are in the moment where people, Venezuelan people and Cuban people like me, are telling you, be careful, because this specter of socialism is coming. And my message will be for Americans that take this message seriously, because it is happening. In the last 10 years, the young people's response to socialism, they see it more favorably. At least, like, I think there was a study made, like a poll made by Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, who, they do this poll every year, and the results were that, the younger generation was constantly being more favorable to the ideas of socialism. And that's very dangerous. And the same way that it was professors back then and intellectuals who were like introducing these little ideas into the minds of the youth, now it's happening in the US. Now it's happening in many other places, not only in the universities, but also in book clubs and things like that. It is happening very actively. So this is the time where you have to decide to take it seriously or to not take it seriously, and then look down and down the line, and in 20 years see what happens with this country. Like you say, they're planning a revolution. I wouldn't doubt it. I think that we're seeing the rise of a lot of communist groups. I think there was in New York and Philadelphia big
Yes.
marches of communist,
Yes.
new communist party in the U.S. That's terrifying, if you ask me. But again, I think my role and my call here in the U.S. is to keep saying what I'm saying. Tell these stories like I tell you, and to bigger audiences every time I can, and to always make the distinction that this is really what socialism brings, like Venezuela. Venezuela is the end result. There's nothing beyond, because they always tell you, oh, that wasn't real socialism because we didn't reach to the goal. And the answer to that is that you will never reach to the goal. That is the end result. Cuba is the end result. The Soviet Union is the end result. That's the end result of socialism and communism. There's nothing else. So again, pay attention to to what's going on in universities. Be active in universities. We have to be active in universities. We need to fight those ideas back, not only as students, but also if you're a professor and you see other faculty trying to spread these things, be active and be against.
Yeah.
This is also a call for professors, because professors are the ones who shape the ideas of new students who have nothing, no understanding of politics. They are the ones who are going to shape in big way their political thought, and that's a call for them too, to don't just step away, be active, denounce socialism, denounce communism. It's bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what does the future look like for you, Erik? What does the future look like for you in this country? What are your aspirations, your hopes, your dreams, if you feel comfortable sharing, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I'm living the American dream happily. Every day that I stay here, every day that I'm waking up in this beautiful country, especially in this beautiful state in Florida, I am living the American dream. It is a blessing because I've lived in other places around the world, and there's nothing like the U.S. This is not an exaggeration or a hyperbole. There is nothing like the U.S. There's nothing like the U.S. There's no other place in the world where you can come from nowhere, like a different country, start over, and make a really good life out of the work and the time that you spend working on yourself and working for your family and working on a business and things like that. It is absolutely different in any other place in the world. So you have to really take care of this country. And my future, I wouldn't say that I have anything planned or anything like super necessarily correct. Basically just have a family, grow up in this country, stay, and then you know work on my career. I want to see where that leads me. I think that's I am a regular guy. I am just a regular guy who happened to live through all of these things and who is very active because I don't want this country to become what I left, and that's why I'm very active. But I'm really just a regular guy who wants the best for his new home, and that's what I'm doing. And that's, I guess, we'll see what the future has for me. But definitely, I'm already working on having a stable, safe life where I don't want to leave this country ever again. And I won't. I will fight every day in the, like they say, the battlefield of ideas to
Yeah,
save this country from the destruction of socialism.
that's absolutely beautiful. That's a beautiful sentiment. And as an American, as a native-born American, I must say, see, people have this perception. Citizenship has been reduced to a legal designation given to you by the customs office. When citizenship is more than just that. People will say, well, citizenship means you're loyal to your country. Okay, well, loyalty without an overarching context of appreciation and understanding of what your country is not loyalty. It is servility. It is a blind slavery. America, in my opinion, is a statement of philosophy. And if you're going to be a real American, you have to understand the philosophical values that underpin our nation's founding. There are a lot of native-born Americans that, in my opinion, are not real Americans because they have no idea what it means to be an American. It means you believe in the ideas. There are truths that go beyond political power, natural law. You believe that man has the ability to organize his life according to his own will and respect to the rights of others. That's liberty. Believing that man is a creature of reason and he is able to settle his disputes, not with violence, but most importantly, with discussion, with cooperation. It's believing in the power of community, popular sovereignty. These things define America. And so many people, even people that call themselves patriots, don't know this stuff. And so the fact that you a Venezuelan, a guy from Caracas who saw hell on earth, can come here and say what you just said, it really is. I don't curse, but I'm going to say it's fucking beautiful. It's fucking beautiful. I'm serious. I'm sorry to my older audience that doesn't like that. Sorry, guys. But I have to say that because I mean it. It's beautiful to see, and I wish you a happy and healthy life here in America. One
Thank
last
you very
question though
much.
before we wrap up. And by the way, I want to thank you for being here. It means
No.
quite a lot to me. A lot of
Thank you for the
yeah,
invitation. This is really great. I'm really enjoying this.
yeah, absolutely. Me too. Me too. One of the best I've done in a long while. Interviews I've done. A lot of people I talk to are very pessimistic about the future of America. They're very negative. They tell me, Christian, we're going to have a civil war. Christian, our country's going to be destroyed. Christian, this, Christian, that. And sometimes I just want to tell them to be quiet and leave me alone. But I also understand that they're pointing out real things that are happening in reality that cause reasonable people to be concerned. But you seem to have a hope for our country. So, to the people that are the doomers, so to speak, tell them, in your perspective, why we should be hopeful about America.
Well, I think that we should be hopeful about America. Well, for two reasons. One that is practical. I'll start with that one. Because you're gonna win a fight that you're already thinking you're gonna lose, right? If you're not hopeful, if you don't see an end of the line, if you don't think that a possibility of saving these countries possible, then you're already doomed to lose. Just by the nature of the human being. If you don't think there's hope, we're gonna just end up in darkness. And the second one, that is the most important, of course, is for what it represents. I think that there is a fight to be fought. Sorry for the redundance. For the soul of this country. And when I mean soul, what I mean by soul is what you just described. The values, what this country represents, what this country's values were, what was this country founded on, and that rock needs to be preserved and needs to be fought for. Many of the founding fathers talk about this, about how America is not just meant to last, is meant for us to preserve, right? It's not going to last by its own. It needs its citizens to move forward. So that is the fight that we need to do. And you see a lot of people who want to destroy that rock, because for many people, America is the personification of everything that they despise. The communists despise the value of America because it goes against what they believe, and they will do everything in their power to try to destroy it. And that's why we see the things that we're seeing, and that's why we see the destruction, and that's why we see the division, and that's why we see the hatred towards your neighbor just because he thinks different. And those ideas just came directly from the left. Like they were the ones who put it on the table. Now we need to fight smart. We need to learn the things that they do, but also be able to differentiate and when not to fall to that level. We cannot hate our neighbor for thinking different. We need to embrace that and know that disagreement is part of the political process. Now we also need to be aware of who is trying to create that division and how they're trying to divide the country. We need to be very aware. And again, I guess that that's part of our duty as citizens, or well, not mine yet, but I guess like the people who are listening to you and who listen to you who are more pessimistic, there is a fight to be fought, and it's your duty as citizen and people who I know that they love America, and that's why they're sad and pessimistic, because they're worried about the future. Well, it's time to step up. It's time to put your grain of salt. It's time to be active. And I don't mean enrolling into the Republican Party and do a lot of things. That's part of it, but also fixing that relationship with your neighbors, creating those fixing that unity within the communities. You don't have to agree 100%, but that's how you start fixing this country that they have worked so hard to divide. So that's how you start, and that's how we move forward. And it's your duty as citizens, and well, mine now that I'm here and I want to see this country, you know, move to a better future is also my fight as well. And that's what we have to do. Keep fighting.
I agree. Keep fighting. That is a beautiful note to close it on. Erik, thank you so much for being here. Do you have anything that you want to plug or promote before we log off for the night?
Um, I think that I just wanted to end with just saying that for people who are learning about what's going on in Venezuela and everything like that, and they're thank you for caring. First of all, I'm just very grateful for that, because it's very important to see how bad decisions early on can lead to horrible futures, and that was our case. It's also a warning for America, but also that it's very difficult. And I have said many things during this conversation that may look like I don't trust the political opposition. I don't trust a lot of them because of the actions that I have seen. Don't give me the confidence in them that I think that an opposition leadership should have and earn, especially in this kind of process. But again, that's when you're doing an objective analysis, that's how it comes out. But again, I wish to be wrong. I think that's the most important part. I want to be wrong because my analysis ends in this is not the time for Venezuela, and a lot of people will die. Sadly, I want to be wrong. That's the most important part. I want to be wrong more than anybody, but I cannot just wish. I need to be proven wrong. So, but also end on a good note that it is still a really good time for America. We are in time to reverse the things that have been wrong, and to also stop this huge movement before it's too late.
Awesome. Do you have any social media you want to plug at all? Where do people find you if they want to go see more of your
Yeah.
commentary?
Yeah. I am in Instagram and in X as @Erik Suarez N. So it's @Erik only with K, Suarez, Suarez N at the end.
And I will be sure to link your profiles in the description. Erik, my friend, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. And everybody else, please stay pensive. Bye-bye.